And unmute. Okay.
Good evening.
That was you. Yeah, just like while we're in that transition time, because I know that like the staff will be leaving, so maybe you just offer that hard copy to everyone. Good.
You want to test? Maureen?
There's some echoing, but I can hear you. Now I'm not hearing you, but I believe you're trying to tell me something.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
So,
Can't hear her. Hey, Maureen, do another test for me. Can you
You're
talk?
looking mighty fine.
Thank you, dear. I appreciate it. Keep talking to me.
You got a haircut? Let me see.
I
What else
did.
can I observe?
I
I'm looking at the
did.
ceiling.
You are so funny. It shows it's connected.
When we present, am I unmuting me or do you unmute me? Did you catch that, Cheryl? Cheryl?
Is he your representative? Mo is actually on a conference call. Wish she could hear it. Hey, buddy. Hi there. What? Tomorrow you're coming over. Oh, yeah, we've learned to put that remote up already. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. Is it still 10 o'clock? Be there by 10? Okay.
You wanted to go earlier though, Kenny, so you could get more done and I can keep an eye on them. Ken, you wanted to go earlier.
Okay. Oh, isn't it awesome?
Cheryl, if you can hear me, I lost visual with you guys, but I can see the slide. Okay, now I have you.
Try and talk again, Maureen.
Okay, I can see you both now under his name.
All right, talk again.
I can see you both under his name, under Dr. Adams' name.
I don't know what we did differently. It's
Working
on.
or not working?
We hear you through the computer, not through the speaker.
Hmm. Cheryl, are we,
Yeah.
where are we on the agenda? Are we?
Hold on a minute. Testing, testing.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Hold on a minute. We did this before. That's what I don't understand. Oh.
What's the issue, Cheryl?
We can't hear you very loud in the room. Hey, Maureen, can you call in?
Yeah. Who do I call into or what phone?
I'm gonna send you this, hold on. Natalie.
And we leave early on Saturday.
Natalie, can you talk for us? We're checking the sound.
Yeah. Check 1, 2, 3. Test. How is everyone?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Everything good there?
No, we can't hear you on the speaker here.
Okay. Do you want me to keep talking?
Natalie, I'm Maureen Clancy May with the Department of Ed.
Nice to meet you
Nice to meet
virtually.
And you are a board member?
Yes.
So do all of the board members join virtually?
No, I am actually joining virtually right now due to a medical condition. I am currently pregnant and a high risk pregnancy, so I'm trying to minimize risks.
Very smart, very. We just had a new grandbaby last month come into the world, and I can't imagine, like, with all the pandemic issues, pregnant moms, it's a scary thing, but they delivered a healthy baby in Chicago, Illinois.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
You should be.
The sound comes through best when if they're on, don't put the it's louder when your microphone is not on.
said, I'll do my presentation first and see what happens.
You're ready for me to call.
1 minute.
We can just, if she's not, if we can't see her anyway, can she just call and do like a, that's what we're gonna.
Just testing. I still have a bit of an echo here. How is it on your end?
Okay, thank you. Maureen, can you try speaking?
Yes, I'm here. And I too get that echoing.
Maureen, is that better?
This is Natalie. I'm not hearing the echo anymore.
Do you hear me?
I can hear you. We are good. I am good.
Maureen? Maureen, can you hear me? Maureen, you're muted. Maureen, you're muted.
Am I unmuting just the
Maureen,
computer?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I am present.
My colleagues and ways of estimation of the 2024 technical glitches, and that's what we are currently working through. I would like to start this meeting with a review of the November consent agenda. Is there any comments or questions on that? It is in your folder. So there's relatively short, so we'll go through them quickly. So if you have one, please let me know. Any questions on item 1? Item 2 is agreement to school outreach and development for the free New York project. Item 3 is MOU with Block Q as it pertains to CSIP. Item 4 is MOU with the Missouri Department of Social Services and Jobs for advanced graduates. Item 5, contract CE3 for CPN and 2 other schools. Item 6, to approve the fall transportation, the fall route for the fiscal year 2021. Item 7, contract with K-12 for the laptop platform. Item 8, MOU for the Boys and Girls Club Greater St. Louis. Item 9, contract with Robert Oil, Specialty Community Buying Services. Item 10, contract with ACHIEVEMEN and third residential Medicaid claim management for therapy services. Item 11 is the MOU with St. Louis Alliance for Period Supply. And item 12 is to approve the acceptance of funds from Parsons Fluid for teacher certification program. Any questions on the consent agenda as a
Good evening to the board and public at this point in time. The program requested Dr. Lorraine Dr. Matthews, the representative of the Central Region, to provide an update to the maternity supplement education program school improvement plan, consistent presentation of that plan in May. However, simply kind of over the agenda, the intent tonight is to do a MSIP overview, MSIP to CSIP, school improvement plan, overview of the children related to the school, the MSIP timeline, the concept of the school improvement plan, development of the school improvement plan, process that is done within the school improvement plan, and the transformational plan, which is the district strategic plan, CROSSWALK approach, and show how they are linked together. The CSIP alignment system, I will cover project management, and we will both take any kind of questions that the board might have relative to the presentation tonight. So without further ado, that's transformation present. The state is now allowed to this point in time, and so she will be coming by audio to do a presentation for the board, and you have a copy of that presentation in the packet. You received one earlier through email. That presentation has been updated. If you look at the packet, there's an updated presentation, not one that you would have provided, but several slides that have changed and updated, especially at the end of the presentation. You'll find the same thing for the presentation on the foundation. So it's a draft, and indicated there in the email that they will allow you to subcomment it, and from my with the presentation before you have this on the plan. So without further ado, I'll open it up and allow Dr. Frank to make or start with slide 3. And the slide that is in your packet is the number. You see the file number. Dr. Clancy, you may start.
Good evening.
Good evening. Go ahead.
I think the idea is that the public is well, we can do this conversation, then come back to this and not
Okay. Let's try this. Good evening, everyone.
Everybody's mic off. Okay, Maureen, go ahead.
Okay. I hope this works better. My apologies for not being with you in person. Unfortunately, we have a travel ban, so I am delighted to join you the best way virtually. And Cheryl, if we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you get that, is that, is very able to be louder?
If I do it much louder, we'll get feedback, but I'll try. Maureen, go ahead.
If you could move to the next slide, please. Can you move to the next slide?
Just give us a second. She's trying to do it now.
Well, I'm here tonight to co-present on MSIP 5, and more importantly, the question I was asked initially was comprehensive school improvement plan. But I think it's important that you all have some context. So if you'll bear with me, I will just do a quick highlight of the history of MSIP 5, what it is, and how it's related to the comprehensive school improvement plan, or in your case, the transformation plan. MSIP 5 is the 5th iteration of the Missouri School Improvement Program, which began actually in 1990. It outlined the expectations for student achievement, and it has really been our guidepost for how we support schools and districts moving forward in their work toward continuous improvement and helping students achieve high quality standards that will help them face college and career success. MSIP 5 is our system to distinguish schools, their performance in schools that need improvement so that they can receive the support and assistance, but also it's an opportunity for the state to recognize high performing and accredited school districts as models of excellence. A word that you're hearing, that you'll hear most often is the annual performance report, the APR we call for short. And that is the mechanism by which we use our performance standards for accreditation purposes at the district level. So MSIP 5 contains both resource and process standards, which are qualitative in nature, but it's the performance standards that you'll hear most often talked about. And that's the quantitative data that we get from student assessments. Next slide, please. So districts can use the MSIP, the APR scores, if you will, to plan and to determine where the district stands in not only the support of Missouri schools, but in their own goals setting. From the MSIP, then we use the CSIP, which is the actual tool that a district can utilize to prioritize improvement needs. And in our case, we often will support and acknowledge that schools can choose their own template for developing that school improvement plan. And in St. Louis Public Schools, we know it's the transformation plan that serves as their improvement, continuous improvement tool. Next slide. So here you'll see the basic timeline of MSIP since its inception. We have been in a holding pattern for several years now for MSIP 5. And if you go to the next slide, it will detail why that's the case. In all the little bulleted areas above and below the timeline, you'll see all the activity that's taken place through the course of MSIP 5. Anytime there's been new standards added or a new assessment that's been implemented, it has held us off with APR scores in that particular content area. So you can see that there's been a lot of changes since 2012 when MSIP 5 began. And just recently, well, February of this calendar year, the State Board of Education did approve MSIP 6. But let me talk to you a little bit about MSIP 6 and where we are with that. As you know, the 2020 state assessments were canceled due to the pandemic. Therefore, we have no fall APR. And schools were informed early on that there would not be an annual performance report given for each of the schools. Now DESE's working with old data, and that's going to be an issue. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. The soonest that the department will have information coming out on MSIP 6 will be in the spring. There will be 2 specific activities taking place at that time. One, the MSIP standards individually will be piloted sometime around spring or shortly thereafter. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later. And in addition, there will be a standing ad hoc committee for MSIP 6 metrics, and that will convene in the spring of 2021. So before MSIP 6 is rolled out for the purpose of accrediting and providing support and interventions to schools. These things have to take place. The piloting of standards in a given area, as well as determining what the metrics will look like for the APR. The next slide, please. So as a school board of education, governance is a critical and essential element of the CSIP plan. And if you go to the next slide, a couple pieces that I would really like you to focus on is, what is the written evaluation process for your plan? How is it regularly evaluated and updated? That is a typical role for school boards to play. And also the Board of Education utilizes CSIP to monitor progress and the continuous improvement of programs and services. So when I'm thinking about your role as a school board, those are the key areas in which you play a role. Next slide. So as we mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, the CSIP serves as that long-range planning tool. Your plan, your CSIP plan, is called the Transformation Plan 3.0. And it does meet all of the expectations for the State Department in terms of not only identifying the what, the goals and objectives, but your plan, the Transformation Plan 3.0, certainly details how. What are the strategies that will create the desired outcomes for those goals? The CSIP is the means by which the improvement is going to occur, and there's a regular regional school improvement effort, and we'll talk. I'll share a little bit in how that works and how I've interacted with the district on that. But there's an opportunity for the board to participate in a regional review of progress for your CSIP plan. And by the way, for your information, as an area supervisor, one of 13 in the state, and I serve as a liaison with not only St. Louis Public Schools, but the charter schools in the city of St. Louis. I regularly review district plans, and I also review and give feedback for school improvement, individual school improvement plans. So if we look at the next slide, these are the key components of a thorough, thoughtful, comprehensive school improvement plan. And I won't read them to you, but I think the plan components are what you're most interested in. And I think that for some of the work that you want to do as you consider moving forward, there'll be some options that I'd like to share with you at the end of our presentation when we field some questions. But you can see those are all the basic elements of a good, thorough, thoughtful plan for improvement and taking the school district further. Next slide. So we always make sure that the comprehensive school improvement plan contains a method for regional school improvement. So who is the team? What constitutes a team that will regularly review progress on a plan? For a district plan, that would be a district team. A board member could certainly be considered as a member of that team, but also in the work that most schools do, the superintendent provides regular reports on the progress of that school. You have the planning process that's outlined. The data is important because not only are you looking at the quantitative data, which includes everything from academic progress of students, but it also would include survey data, the qualitative. How do you get information from surveying your students, your faculty and staff, and your parents? What kind of information can they provide that will be helpful in determining or refining your goals and objectives, but also to share in a progress report on how your goals are being implemented, the strategies by which they are implemented. Currently under MSIP 5, the 4 key areas that each school is asked to consider for inclusion in their plan focuses on leadership, collaborative cultures, which is climate related, curriculum and assessment, and effective instruction. With MSIP 6, this will change a little bit. Leadership will remain. Then the second strand will be effective teaching and learning. The third strand will be collaborative climate and culture. A fourth strand will be data-based decision-making. Number 5 will be alignment of standards, curriculum and assessment. And number 6, equity and access. It's important to note that MSIP 6 was developed with statewide input from a variety of groups, including parents, teachers, associations from across the entire state over a very lengthy period of time. These key strands surfaced as the primary areas that a school district should cover in their own comprehensive plan, and in your case, the transformation plan. Within each of those strands, there are a number of standards and indicators. The standards are what is expected for a school and a school district to achieve, and the indicators will help a school describe more of the how they will get there. What are the details? What are the specifics, the look-fors that would give information not only to you as a board, to your community, but to the department as how they're making progress on a given standard. The metrics committee that I referred to earlier will need to address the indicators and assign a quantitative value or a qualitative value to all of the indicators within all of those areas. And I would ask, as I usually do, to have St. Louis Public Schools represented on such a committee. Your voice really matters. Next slide. And I think I will turn this over. I don't know if you want to pause for questions. I think we'll wait to the end for questions. Dr. Adams?
Yes, I think that's appropriate. So this slide really provides a crosswalk between the St. Louis Public School Transformation Plan and the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. Transformation Plan 3.0 was put in place in March 2018 with some 50 staff persons, parents engaged together to come up with the rudiments, if you will, of the plan. And so you can see what the alignment is in terms of the academic achievement, subgroup achievement, college and career. And again, I won't read to you, but the crosswalk simply is the transformation plan aligned to the kinds of things that Dr. Transformation just indicated. The next slide talks about 2.0, and I'll spend a little time here. And as you know, the district was fully accredited in 2017, and so we thought it was the appropriate time then to revision Transformation Plan 2.0. And basically what we tried to do is to determine what actually happened as a result of Transformation Plan 2.0. The items in red indicate what data that we gleaned from what we were trying to achieve in Transformation Plan 2.0, looking at the indicators that you see on the left-hand side. We shifted to Transformation Plan 3.0, as I said before. This is a transformation plan that is supposed to last for 3 years, from 2018 to 2021. One of the reasons why the board president wanted to have a conversation, because she saw that the plan was ending, or likely ending in 2021. And I think that Dr. Transformation will speak to the board relative to what their options might be as it relates to that, in light of the fact that we are in a pandemic. So you can see that we added another indicator to Transformation Plan 2.0, and those are the things that you see in red. Dr. Transformation framed this notion of equity, which is going to be an MSIP 6. And so we thought it would be germane to add it to our plan, because we knew that it was coming down the pipe as it relates to what the state was looking to do. We were on several committees as they were talking about this, so we have some preliminary indication that that will be the case, and that's why you see equity added to the particular plan. But these are the goals for the transformation plan 3.0. This particular slide simply indicates on the left-hand side what the MSIP 6 is, what our goals are aligned to that, and what the school improvement plan would be in terms of those indicators that that schools would have to produce to show what's actually happening in their schools that would be aligned to our transformation plan and therefore aligned to the MSIP. And you can see the indicators on the right-hand side. Now, this is not all encompassing. These are just some highlighted indicators that are part of the school improvement plan that we will be looking at to determine if it's aligned to the transformation plan and obviously MSIP. The next slide really talks about progress monitoring. I think you will see something in the first email that laid out the monitoring as it was related to 2.0. You can see the difference between the monitoring process. As a matter of fact, that monitoring process for me starts tomorrow with network superintendents coming in, reviewing what schools are actually doing. We have an hour presentation by the network superintendent that will provide us the indicators or the information from schools. But basically what we are doing is tracking goals, the action steps, the KPIs or the metrics that align to this, and a timeline. Now, I need to indicate that since the pandemic in March of 2020, we have not spent a great deal of time monitoring the transformation plan. Our focus, as you know, has been really germane to trying to get kids back in school. But after the first quarter ended last week, we are now putting a process in place to go back and to start doing the kind of meetings that we had before to make sure that the alignment is there with transformation plan 3.0. I think it's yours at this time, Dr. Pessimist.
So again, let me paint the picture. So MSIP, whether it's MSIP 5 and we'll be rolling into MSIP 6, it sets first of all strands, key strands by which standards are then developed. The standards are the expectations the department has for each and every school district, every charter LEA. Within each standard, there's a series of indicators that further delineate what that standard means, what the look-fors are. It gives a better description and a variety of descriptions. And from that, there will be metrics created that will then be sent out to schools so they understand what their annual performance report will be based on. That's the process that we will be moving forward. It's, again, very important for SLPS, being one of the larger school systems in our state, to always have a place to have their voice at the table. So I have always encouraged Dr. Adams to have representation, and I would continue to that and remind folks to submit names for staff to sit on the metrics. And then also, as a board, a conversation you may wish to have with your leadership in the district is, would you be interested in piloting an MSIP standard, or I'm sorry, MSIP strand, one strand in any of those 6 areas that I shared: leadership, effective teaching and learning, collaborative culture and climate, data-based decision-making, alignment of standards, curriculum and assessment, and equity and access. Once those pilot periods are finished, then any minor adjustments will be made, and then it will be rolled out in trainings for all the districts and LEAs across the state. I have sent Dr. Adams the full State Board of Education report on MSIP 6 that was presented and approved in February, so that you all can get better acquainted with this new iteration that comes about. In this last page, I also want to assure you that the department works with individual school systems to look for alignment. So we take the MSIP standards, we look to see how they are addressed in your district's transformation plan. And then not only that, but we want to make sure that every school improvement plan is further aligned to the district's plan and then to the state standards. And that's something I do every year during the summer. And I work closely with the school leadership and the building principals. And we've had a very smooth, effective process by which we review and move forward with individual and district plans. So it's been a really great partnership, and the department has appreciated being a thought partner and a collaborator with the district on developing and implementing their improvement plans at the school and at the district level. Dr. Adams mentioned some options to consider. So this is, I guess, the question part before we lead into questions. Right now, it's a challenging time for your district, as it is for all schools across the state with this pandemic that we're in. So districts have options to think about. You can wait for MSIP 6, which your comprehensive improvement plan, your transformation plan will ultimately need to be aligned. Yes, sir? I didn't know if you were saying anything.
No.
Okay, so a district could certainly wait for MSIP 6 to be fully rolled out. I don't believe there will be any changes to the strands or to the standards. You could do a total revision of your transformation plan right now, but know that the indicators could still undergo some tweaking, in which case you would have to go back and revisit that. Or you can consider moving forward with certain parts of your revisions as you move your plan forward. Your plan always rolls forward. And what I mean by that is it certainly would be appropriate right now to consider revisiting your vision and mission for the school, for the district. You could certainly work on setting your goals for finance. A very common place for school districts to address in the financial realm is, for example, fund balances, and also instructional resources. And what I mean by that is right now we're all swimming in the sea of distance learning. And so you could look at how our finances support these instructional resources in this virtual world that we're in, or a hybrid world that we're in. I know that your district, like many, are very concerned about the social emotional learning, welfare of your students and families and teachers. And your district is certainly not the only district that has ever considered right sizing. If you're not familiar with that term, it's a term that school districts often use to adjust the size of the number of schools they have to have better impact on the resources of your school system so that they can address the instructional program. And I know from following along with your board meetings in the past that you have certainly moved and studied the issue of right sizing your school district. So those are all viable things for you to think about if you would want to address the financial goals, and certainly could do that now. So there's lots of things. I know that you have done your due diligence in making sure that your transformation plan is aligned with the goals set by the superintendent or for the superintendent with the superintendent. And that's very helpful because they should all be aligned. But so you do have options to consider, and how you go forward is certainly your call. And we're here to help in any way we can. But I believe that in this time of the pandemic, there's probably a incremental way to move forward that would certainly put you in good place as you prepare for MSIP 6. And we see what changes may still come about. Questions about anything that I've shared?
Thank Thank you, Dr. Clancy. If the board has any questions, I can direct. I think she can listen to us. Final version of M66, when will it roll out, Dr. Clancy?
With the work convening, I don't see it rolling out till at the earliest next school year. Because again, we're looking for districts to volunteer to pilot a particular strand and standards. And we're also looking for a statewide committee to determine the metrics by which the APRs will be developed. That's going to take time. So at the earliest, it would be sometime in the next school year, and that might even be soon, too soon.
Dr. Roberts, I see that you have a question.
My question is for you, Dr. Ash. Do we have representation on these various committees?
We have had representation in the past. Once the new committees are put in place, as Dr. Clancy May has indicated, she will invite us. The state will make a selection. Ms. Danoa has been on one of the committees. Dr. Knight has been on the committees as well. Yes, we have had representation in the past and hope to continue having representation.
Thank you, Dr. Clinton, for this presentation. So here you say that there's a request for districts to pilot the M66 grant. Would that be something you could do? So kind of combine that with rolling forward the previous transformation plan to be roll that forward and potentially pilot, one of the grants that you're looking at for M66.
Dr. Adams, if you could repeat that, I didn't quite catch it.
So the question was, you talked about piloting a standard. Is it possible to pilot a standard simultaneously as you are upgrading or updating the transformation plan?
Yes, it's possible. You could certainly pilot a leadership strand, for example, while you're working on another area, finance or equity. Leadership, for information, leadership contains both governance, school board governance, as well as district leadership. But yes, you could certainly pilot one while you're working on another. Or you could pilot and try to work on the same one at the same time. And if you're interested in piloting, I'm certain you'll have that conversation with your superintendent, and then he can let me know. I don't want to have you miss an opportunity if that's something you'd like to do.
Mr. Lang?
So you mentioned the fact that there's no fault APR data to that, I guess, slowing down the progress of M66. My question is from, I guess, 2012 now. What is the M65 data looking like from districts that have implemented already? Like, what's the overall judgment on M65?
So the question was, what's the overall judgment on M65 since the data, that there's no recent data from from testing? Am I correct, Mr. Lang?
Right, knowing that it started in 2012.
Knowing that it started in 2012. So what does the history of MSIP say to the state relative to the testing component or the APR component?
I'm not sure if I'm hearing the question correctly, but you're asking what data goes into the APR?
Now, what does the historical data from 2012 indicate to the state relative to how districts are doing across the state based on MSIP? MSIP 5, based on MSIP 5.
Okay, so the State Department puts out their own report of progress on the APR, or at least I should say it, that they put out annual data on students' performance across the state. They don't publicly put out comparisons from one district to another, but they do put out data that shows how students are performing on the state assessment, both grade level assessments and EOS. Just as an aside, typically the state looks at the previous 3 years of data, and that's where we're experiencing a glitch right now because we don't have 2020 data. So I think that's the conversation that the department is wrestling with now, is if you're trying to use the 3 previous years of data and you're missing how do you move forward? So there's more to conversation. I don't believe that probably answered your question. So if you want to re-ask in another way, I'll give it another shot.
Maybe let me see if I can clarify just a little bit, and Mr. Lang can correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, go ahead.
So, yeah, if I'm gonna rephrase it, I'll move this way, based on our, since we won't compare, based on SLPS's performance in the past on MSIP, what would be your projection for, how SLPS could perform on MSIP?
Did you hear the question?
No, I can't hear.
So, based upon SLPS performance in the past, how do you predict, or can you predict, or how do you predict they will do on MSIP 6, based on historical data of St. Louis Public School District?
Well, I think the prediction is going to be a challenge. I do think that you have your own formative data that you currently use. Most districts and LEAs do have formative data, which does tell a story about growth. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around the state about looking at assessment data in terms of individual student growth and the impact that has. So I think you can make predictions based on formative data, which I believe you do. I think that once schools become more familiar with the strands and the standards and indicators, I think that will help with their input to the state on what should be considered. But I think right now we rely on districts knowing their students, knowing their assessments, seeing and looking and analyzing the longitudinal data that they get on cohort groups as well as individuals. And they're able to do a very nice job, I think a very pretty spot on job of predicting students' success.
Thank you.
We take a lot of stock in formative data as well, even though right now there hasn't been a place for that formative data in the APR.
Dr. Robert?
Did I hear that there's some related part of growth model or value-added component around student achievement?
So, is the board hearing that we are leaning toward a growth model or value-added model around student achievement?
A lot of schools are studying growth models. The department has been wrestling with that. We're not there yet. And I know that that's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation, discussion. I think the concern is the comparability from one. I mean, first of all, the state needs the comparability measures. And if schools, districts are using different formative tests in a growth model, it would be very difficult or impossible for the state to compare that information when they're using different assessment tools. So I know that that's an ongoing dialogue. I know in the St. Louis region, there's a group of educators that are on their own ad hoc committee, and they report regularly out to all the constituents in the St. Louis region on progress. But I think that that's one of the key issues that's been a challenge for the department. And so we're not there yet. I think the department will recognize that the growth model is an important one. It's just trying to figure out the metrics around that so that you have some uniformity with the assessment tool used from one district to the next. Does that make sense?
This school district taking a state assessment, that can't serve as a baseline versus each school district getting a formative assessment to establish a growth model.
If each school district is taking the same assessment, the state assessment, can't that serve as a baseline to a formative assessment around a growth model or value added?
If each district was using the same formative assessment?
State assessment.
Oh, state assessment. Well, yes, but I know that there's a lot more to it. And I think that the door is open for that, but I think there's a lot more detail that I'm not the best person to respond to. I think that's where we have all of our data specialists in the department that probably could weigh in, and probably Ms. Van Oy could weigh in a little bit on that as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a push for growth model. I'm not sure how the department hasn't seen anybody submit a recommendation yet that could possibly work. And I know that the commissioner is open to any plan that could be submitted that would delineate what that would look like, how that would work. There's been nothing submitted to the department as of yet.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Dr. Clancy? Could you explain growth model to the board, Dr. Clancy?
I think Ms. Van Oy probably could do a better job of it than I can. She deals with the data on a regular basis. Do you mind if she would give it a shot?
Not at all. That's fine.
So remember last month when we had the STAR assessment that Dr. Guide and I talked about, we talked a lot about growth projectile in the STAR data. It's a comparison of the same students from the previous year and how each student did individually. The problem is we only have annual assessments in ELA and math. With science, we only give it in 5th grade and then 8th grade. So it's hard to show an annual growth model when you only give the assessment every 3 years.
So you're saying growth.
Growth. G-R-O-W, growth.
That was my misunderstanding. I kept hearing growth.
No,
Saying growth.
growth model. Okay.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Clancy?
Could I just say one last thing? I
Yes,
know
ma'am.
you may be eager to move forward. I really think, and I know that Dr. Adams really spelled out a very thoughtful monitoring, a couple slides on monitoring. I think that's typically the most important role a board plays, is how you monitor progress on the goals. And there's lots of conversation that you have on, what is it? What are you looking at? Is there clarity and uniformity on how you interpret the goals and the objectives? And is everybody clear on the look fors? And I think that alone is a lot for the board to take responsibility for. It's not the only thing, but it is a really key piece. Oftentimes we will see school systems that are struggling because they've lost sight of their CSIP plan, their goals, and they have not developed a system for progress monitoring. So I can't stress that enough. It's really a critical role, or one of the many critical roles that a board member plays, is how they monitor progress, join in on the conversation with the leadership of the school, and make certain that feedback is provided.
I want to say thank you very much. I know the board has said thanks as well for your presentation tonight, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-up from the board president to you relative to what the next steps might be. after some coordination with administration. So thank you very much, Dr. Clancy, May, for your presentation tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You want it to stay here? What do you want?
Definitely my question.
Okay, all right. At this point in time, there's a presentation that is in your packet again. Again, you received an electronic copy as I met with the board president on last Tuesday, Wednesday, in review of this document. At least as we discussed it, I indicated that this is a draft. There would be a hard copy coming, and that's what's in your packet. So I ask that you refer to the hard packet. So this is a draft document. Obviously, it will be tweaked after this meeting and tweaked again prior to the board meeting that is coming up in November. The district leadership remains steadfastly committed to fulfilling the district's vision and mission, upholding the district's core beliefs. Obviously, the board is doing some work right now on mission and vision and achieving our current transformation plan 3.0, which we just discussed at length. At the same time, St. Louis Public leadership and the public at large are recognizing opportunities to reallocate district assets to more effectively achieve mission and vision, consistent with the core beliefs of the district and current transformation plan. Tonight, I want to identify how stakeholders are helping to shape our plans around school consolidation and invite your input as a board into this matter. As you are aware, the board allowed Emerging Wisdom to have a series of meetings starting in February of last year in March, and obviously the pandemic occurred and we stopped with the final recommendation that might be coming. And so at this point in time, what I'm engaging the board to do again, as we indicated in July after the presentation, that we will come back to have this conversation. The pre-pandemic review is building on your recommendations from the community visioning workshop. And when I say your, I'm talking about the public. And so we want to spend some time right now of really kind of reviewing what was said already and kind of basically giving you some review of that information in case the public has forgotten or the board has as well. Just before the pandemic, a series of community vision workshops invited participants to, number one, learn about the current and evolving state of St. Louis Public Schools by, number one, envisioning a system of excellent schools, identifying the top priorities to guide the district's transformational efforts. Again, a link back to the transformation plan. And lastly, reflect on the district criteria for school closure and consolidation decisions. As a recap, I'd like to kind of recap what was said. With regard to the first item, envisioning an excellent school system, you can see that stakeholders prioritize these facets of our work: highly qualified staff, improved physical, social, emotional environment, enhanced culturally responsive curricula, and engaged parents and families, and lastly, equitable practices. This came from the presentation from the community visioning session that occurred, and this comes directly from the presentation we received from Emerging Wisdom. Secondly, community articulated their top priorities for guiding transformational efforts. Again, this came from that particular group: improving teacher quality and retention through better paid benefits and professional development. 92% of persons said that. Increased support and services. 68% of persons said that. Enhanced school curriculum, 60%. Strong, strengthening parent and family involvement and support, 56%. Investing more in the neighborhood schools, 56%. Deepening policies around advocacy efforts, 52%. And cultivate strong school leadership. The top three were improving teacher quality, increasing student support services, and enhancing the school curriculum. Now, the item that was not discussed, as I said before, tonight we will focus our attention on the third objective, which is the criteria for school consolidation. Should be noted that the pandemic really has highlighted some various inequities and systematic changes, challenges in our pre-pandemic model. Many of these challenges were on our radar and were long-term goals in our transformation plan. However, we were forced to address them sooner as a result of the pandemic. What are those? Number one, one-to-one technology for students and teachers, more equitable distribution of technology in schools, standard-based lesson planning, as you heard from Dr. Knight and her team 2 meetings ago, and better integration of technology in the classroom. As educators, we have learned a lot during the pandemic. Perhaps the greatest lesson learned is that we cannot not afford to get back to normal. We have to take what we have learned and use it to keep momentum going. In addition, we know we can improve through a more strategic and optimal allocation of existing resources, and that's what the conversation tonight is about. And right-sizing the district is a critical component of that process, as the board has already agreed as a result of the community visioning process. So, question number 2 is the need for consolidation. I want to set the context for tonight's conversation by describing some of the many phenomena that work within the landscape of the district work. First of all, I'd like to give kudos to Forward to Ferguson that did a great presentation that's about 5 or 6 minutes long that I'd like you to engage with tonight. In order to do that, I'd like to take about 6 minutes to borrow from a metaphor that emerged from the work of Forward to Ferguson, as I indicated before, and so we're going to show this particular presentation tonight.
And they have one thing in common. I've come to black students are worse than educators, advocates, and policymakers have been trying to close these gaps for years, and yet they persist. Let's use a metaphor. Imagine trees in the Southern River waterfront strong. People downstream enjoy all the benefits of time and generous There's fresh, clean water, power, recreation, and irrigation. The townspeople are thriving. On average, they do well, and everything is efficient. But in the Northern River, the water flows into some places where the river does. People downstream have to work twice as hard to meet the most of the city's needs. The townspeople struggle, and this shows up on the state measures. Students here represent the wealthy majority white district. With all the resources flowing into their schools, they have a very different education environment than the people here, who represent the majority black district. What does that look like? For example, majority white districts offer 3 times as many advanced resources as majority black districts. And 48% of majority black districts don't offer calculus. Not a single majority white district fails to offer that support. But what is the source of that support? Let's look upstream. Upstream is water towers on the Southern River. The southern town uses water towers to ensure the town always has resources, even when times are tough. But the Northern River has no water. Because the northern town didn't have the resources to build one. The water towers represent funding available for the district. And funding is a major source of disparity in the education environment. In the 2018-2019 school year, the median majority white district received almost $1,700 more and spent over $2,000 more per student in the median majority black district. In a classroom of 20 students, that's a difference of over $40,000 per student. Those extra dollars add up, not only to more course offerings, but also to higher paid teachers, more in-depth buildings, more extracurricular options, and better technology, all of which contribute to better outcomes. But where do majority white districts on average get more dollars? Let's just follow up the street. Here we see a canal diverting water from the river to the southern. The southern town built in decades now to supplement their water. The canal represents one of the key forces directing more funds towards wealthy majority white districts and furthering those funding disparities. Property taxes. The majority of school funding in every district comes from property taxes. And from one part of our region to another, we see vast differences in property taxes. The median assessed value of property in wealthy majority white districts is over $180,000 per student, almost double the value of majority black districts. Why do we have such disparities in property and property taxes in public schools? goes even farther upstream. It turns out both rivers are fed from the source, but the dam diverts most of the water to the southern. That southern town was responsible for guaranteeing their water flow downstream in generations. That dam is segregation. One of the root causes of disaster is environmental and the problem of education. St. Louis is one of the most segregated cities in the nation. A long history of overtly racist federal, state, and local policies in housing, transportation, and other systems created and reinforced that segregation. In recent decades, we passed more research on policies, but these did nothing to compare the harm segregation has already caused. So while we stopped reinforcing the dam, we haven't torn it down. In other words, while segregation is no longer the law, we, both people and resources, remain highly segregated. 78% of public school students in this district attend a racially complicated school. More than 75% of students in schools are race. The dam of segregation that generations ago still affects schools downstream today. Wealthy majority white schools enjoy a historic and continued strong flow of resources, where students and teachers generally get what they need. While minority black schools, resources are limited, and students and teachers are asked to do more of the class. The legacy of segregation also means that these students arrive at the school. In majority black districts, an average of 7 students is quite much. In the majority white districts, it's just 29. Students who are not qualified are reduced by much, even more reduced. Now, this metaphor is important, no metaphor is, but it does help us see key systemic factors that impact education outcomes. For too long, we tried to produce better outcomes for black and brown students by focusing only on the top downstream. That's like looking at the two riverbeds to understand why the northern mountains can generate more power without ever looking upstream. Even worse, conversations only on outcomes without letting drive reinforce toxic narratives of black kids who don't work as hard, who don't have as much faith, of black parents who don't care as much. But these gaps represent our collective, and this mistakes blame close to the root causes of our racial inequities and helps perpetuate an education system built on unequal funding structures. If we want to change our outcomes, if we believe all children deserve an equal opportunity to thrive, we need to engage with the sources of the outcomes. We have to change the conversation. We have to shift our focus. We have to go upstream. That's the goal of CSIP, a new project for you.
So I think the PowerPoint, the presentation gives a good indication of why there is a disparity between what happens in a county and what happens in a city, and that is a funding stream coming in. So this board has the ability to control the resources going out. And so part of the conversation tonight is what the board can control. Yes, there needs to be an advocacy effort that's continuously around equal funding from this board, from this community, around the resources that each district gets to make sure that there is not such a thing as separate but unequal. But at the same time that that's going on simultaneously, the conversation that we're having tonight is a conversation around resources, around what goes out and what the board can control in light of the dynamics that are before us. If you look at these two districts, the tale of two rivers by the numbers. St. Louis Public Schools and charters, unlike any other state or city in the country, state, Kansas City and St. Louis has to deal with the notion of charters as well. And so any conversation with you around schooling also has to be a conversation around charter schools. It's the story, our region is the story of two rivers of public education. Ours is surely a part of the northern river from the video. As you can see from the graph that's right before us, the demographic makeup of students within our system is comprised primarily of students of color. If you look on the left-hand side, you see St. Louis Public School District, Hazelwood, and Ferguson, all with minority populations. And on the right-hand side, which will be the northern river in this particular case, minority populations that are the minority in their districts. And that will be Kirkwood, MRH, which is Maplewood, Richmond Heights, Ridna, and Webster Grove. So to delve further into this conversation, within the confines of our river, meaning the St. Louis Public School District or the city of St. Louis, the district additional phenomena or straining resources. Number one, if you look at the city's population, between 2010 and 2018, the overall population of St. Louis City decreased by 5.2%, a rate of negative 0.7 per year. Between 2007 and 2018, the population of school-age children ages 5 to 19 decreased by 18.6% at a rate of about negative 2.3% per year. At one of our meetings, I want to say it was the last meeting or the meeting before last, Mrs. Jones asked me about data relative to students who have left the district. It should be interesting to note when we looked at the data, there were about 2,300 students last year who left the district. 48% of that number, over 1,000, left the city of St. Louis. Only about 18% went to charter schools. Only about 300 kids. So an overall number that supports the notion of having too many, the population declining. It's the most recent data that we were able to pull just from this particular school year, that yes, students are leaving the city of St. Louis. Some would say in droves, but the data speaks to the fact that almost half the students who left the St. Louis Public School District left the city of St. Louis totally. And so this is the data that I just spoke to. Next slide. While populations decrease, the supply of schools is increasing. This is a startling piece of data just so that you can see it. And you can't see the picture well, you have a copy of it. In the meantime, the gradual addition of charter schools to the system draws resources from an already depleted river. In 2000, where 103 public schools once served 60,000 students. In 2007 and 8, I arrived as superintendent in 2008, there were about 103 public schools, that's counting charter and district schools, serving about 60,642 students, which is about 589 students per school. In the year 1920, which is last year, there are 110 public schools. That means there are more public schools in 1920 than there were when I arrived in 2008, serving 15,000 less students. So more schools, less students. More schools, less students. Fewer students and more buildings is what you see at the bottom here. And that is the reality of what has happened over the last 10 years. Within the district, these patterns have yielded schools with smaller enrollments, further straining resources. You look at the data, elementary, middle, and high schools. You can see that the desired school size for elementary will be anywhere from 350 to 600, for middle, 450 to 800, high school, 700 to 120. We have 40 elementary schools that are below that number. We have 11 middle schools that are below that number, and so this is the total number of schools. If you look at the district schools that are below that number, you can see it in the middle in red. The suboptimal allocation to students, 32 schools below, 5 middle schools below, 12 high schools below. Within the range that would be optimal allocation of students, there are 20 schools, 4 and 1. Some are approaching, some are above. But the bottom line that we need to understand here is that in red are the number of schools that are below the optimal number. And this would include charter schools as well as public schools, because as I said before, we can't separate the two out that way at this point in time. If you look at individual seats, because you always hear this conversation around seats, quality seats. Overall, this results in a district that has a 43% empty seat number. 43% of our seats are empty. If you count 100%, 57% are filled, but about 43% are empty, meaning empty buildings, empty classrooms, empty corridors. Overall, the results in a district that is flush with empty seats to the tune, as I said before, 43%. The seat capacity is calculated using 95% base utilization factor for all facilities. No current system exists to gather data on building capacity for charter schools. This is just the St. Louis Public School District in this case. As we talked about some additional information that we were able to gather, based on interviews with St. Louis researchers and leaders, including leadership from the Federal Reserve Bank, and this came second party. We did not actually get this data. We got it from another report. The St. Louis City and the county school age population is projected at best to remain stagnant through 2030. So for the next 10 years or so, the population is likely to be stable, although I just indicated that persons are leaving outside the district or the city, but persons are moving in. But it will remain stagnant is what the prediction is right now. According to the same report, there are 51 more schools than needed in St. Louis City. That includes charters as well as the district schools. Our context is changing. The question becomes, how are we? Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. A quote from Nelson Mandela. So I think there's some great opportunities here as we look at our resources and how to better align those resources. So the notion of consolidation and listening to our community, as I mentioned from the start, a cursory reading of the tea leaves, a cursory reading used that consolidations within the district are inevitable. Our stakeholders anticipate this, and they provided us with insights basically from the community visioning last year. Community was asked whether they agree or disagree with the district's 5 criteria. If you remember, these were the 5 criteria that I shared with the board and that we shared: academic performance, feeder patterns, building conditions, citywide development, and capacity. Those were the criteria the criteria that we indicated last year. This question was asked: do you agree with the criteria that the district has used to inform its school closure and consolidation decision? You can see in red what people said about academic performance. 96% said no, it wasn't a good indicator. For feeder patterns, 64% said it wasn't a good indicator. For building conditions, 48% said no. Citywide development, 32%, and capacity, 28% said no, they would disagree with those being the indicators. So key takeaways from the visioning workshop. Number 1, academic performance. They indicated multiple variables impact performance: teacher quality, family environment, district systems of choices like magnet schools or choice schools, feeder patterns, district systems of choice, undermine the feeder patterns and influence performance, and building conditions, deferred maintenance and practices of neglect has exacerbated poor conditions. So what they're basically saying is their rationale for disagreeing. They have laid out here why they disagree with the rationale. Additional recommendations on school closures. The community said apply a racial equity lens to closure criteria. Number 2, focus most on what students and families want. And lastly, weigh factors in order of importance and communicate transparency. This is what the community said. And so these are the kinds of things that I'll be talking about a little bit further. Other stakeholders said the following: in addition to the input provided by the community stakeholders at the community vision process, other individuals have volunteered their own perspectives represented in the above data. And these were online documentation that we received, and you can see what the percentages say here. SLPS must share power with those impacted by the closures. SLPS should conduct an equity impact analysis as part of its closure decision. SLPS should hire community engagement staff to assist families with closures from the community, and SLPS school board create formal policies making roles for community members impacted by closure, and SLPS should acknowledge racism and creating conditions that lead to school closure. And quite frankly, this came from the We Power group. These were some comments that came from We Power that we incorporated in what we reviewed because we looked at everything that was out there. Administrators also weighed in, and this is a really poignant piece that I want to share with the board. We have had the conversation around school closure on a number of different occasions. But past stall efforts at consolidation find schools that previously made the list If we create a list, it has a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it does automatically is put that school on the list in the neighborhood, and that school starts to decline almost overnight. And so prior to me making any kind of list and bringing it back to the board, I need to make sure that if we are going down this road, the board must commit that if they set the criteria, that we critically review the criteria and make decisions around the criteria. We can't, I am not interested in putting a name of the school in the public arena, and for that school at some point in time, for us to play volleyball with the school going back and forth about what it's gonna do or what it's not gonna do. So administration is incredibly serious about this effort, and I believe the board is as well, but I don't wanna go down this road unless the board is committed to, once we establish the criteria, to determine if schools are going to be looked at. Whatever actions the district takes, we will mitigate the negative impact by doing the following. Provide timely, transparent, and honest communication. You can see the upside down triangle. Develop a plan for closed schools. Ensure closure leads to better education for all. One of the things that the board has talked about, and facilitate a smooth transition for all. Part of that requires us to be timely in making decisions. So as we reflect on the community stakeholder input, want to get to really the crux of the conversation tonight. As a result of our discernment process, the district recommends the following. These are the indicators you see on the left-hand side: academic performance, theater patterns, building conditions, citywide development capacity. After listening to the community and looking at all of the data, we are recommending the following. Enrollment demand, building conditions, which is already there, capacity, which is already there, potential for neighborhood collaboration, not just citywide development, but what's the potential? And lastly, other special programs. So on the left-hand side are the things that we initially said when we started this conversation in February. On the right-hand side is what we've come to as a result of listening to the community, listening to everyone. Part of what this board's challenge will be is to accept what these criteria might be, and then to come up with weights as it relates to what that weight might be. My staff has already looked at some of these things, but I need the board to weigh in tonight or at a subsequent meeting to discuss this. One of the things that we are committed to, which is our guiding principles, at least as I look at this, listening to the board and listening to the community, students will experience an improved learning environment as a result of our actions. I remember clearly Mr. Lang saying this multiple times. And so in your packet, you have a document that is called the upgrade rule. In that document, it lays out what needs to happen for students to have an upgraded experience prior to them if schools close. And it lays out clearly what our responsibilities are. What's not in this document are other upgrades that need to take place that the district needs to put in place, like full-time nurses, full-time social workers, full-time counselors, AP courses, calculus courses, other kinds of upgrades that need to take place from a district level. That is not, it is impossible to give that to you tonight because we have not determined if we are going to look to close schools and how many we might be talking about, so that resources might be aligned to that purpose. But that is part of this conversation with the board. But the document you have lays out in a very detailed way what another district has done in terms of upgrading opportunities for kids, such that kids get the first shot at getting into another kind of school, a school that they need to get into. So as we talk about consolidation, we're not talking about just the building here, because I know that's one of the overarching pieces here, but how do we make sure that kids are in a better position? And also the district has additional resources to support them. Whenever possible, school buildings will be repurposed for community use. What I provided to you is a document from Chicago Public School District, CPS. There's a document in your packet that if we make this commitment, we also have to make a commitment by having an advisory committee that not only works with the district about repurposing schools, but selling schools and leasing schools and doing all of those kinds of things that we have historically not done a good job of doing. That might be an outside group that does that with us, but at the end of the day, this can't be a 6-month process. It has to be a long-term process. In Chicago, they closed 50 schools. that advisory committee is still in place as they talk about what they need to do around schools. And I think they closed those schools in 2014-15. So it is an effort that must continue long-term if we go down this particular road. The first two are real commitments that have to be made by administration and the board to do that. It will take additional resources to do that, but those are key components. We will review all consolidation efforts through the lens of equity. Obviously, that's the neighborhood component that we've talked about. How do we make sure that Black and brown kids, or kids that have the greatest need, are getting the greatest services? That is a challenge for the community, a challenge for us, and a challenge for the board to insist that the administration is held accountable around that particular principle. And lastly, we will continue to offer opportunities for community input and make adjustments where necessary. When we talk about consolidation, I don't see from my lens that the consolidation is a one-year effort. This is, if you go back to the front of the presentation, it says SLP as school consolidation considerations for the 2021 and beyond. So it's more than just 2021. This is an effort that will likely be a multi-year effort around this piece. This says, please weigh in. We started with a set of 5 criteria. We listened to the community and adjusted. Now my question is, what do you think as a board? Your input is critical to this effort. Your feedback is obviously guiding as we look to what needs to happen. I want to cover the last couple of slides and then obviously open this conversation up to the board for feedback, questions, or concerns. Planning for next steps. As I look at the next steps, prioritizing, strategizing, and plan the next steps, finalize an acceptance of the new criteria at the November 10th board meeting, presentations of school consolidation plan, including school names to the board on the 17th of November. I think the board president laid out some steps for you as well, and I'm aligning this recommendation to those steps. Community input from November the 18th to December 4th, multifaceted ways that we get the community input since we can't have them in front of us like we would normally do. And then for the board to vote on the school consolidation plan, either at the 8th board meeting or a special meeting on the 15th. Those would be my recommendations at this point in time. I'd like to just leave, as we move forward, our stakeholders remind us to do the following. Develop a transition plan to seek feedback. This again came from the emerging wisdom work. Advance accountability and equity, meaning push it forward. Undertake phased closures, not all in one year. And maintain stewardship of closed buildings, which means that we have to take care of them. We have to make sure that they are not eyesores for the community to the degree that we can. The challenge for us, I think, is a real challenge around a strong partner in Chicago Public School District. The city partnered with the district in this effort, and so it would be incumbent upon us to insist that there's some involvement at the city level, and the city has been engaged with us through their community development arm at this point in time. Lastly, you will either step forward into the growth or you will step back into safety. Maslow said this, and I think we have some real challenges here to kind of think about the video you saw around still unequal video, still unequal, separate but unequal. The challenge, I think, is a challenge around the board leaning into coming up with a recommendation to the superintendent and administration so that we can make a recommendation to the community as it relates to the criteria, as it relates to the weighted factor. We have some suggestions for that, but we wanted to give the board the first opportunity for this conversation before we came back on November the 10th. Lastly, for those persons that I know Ms. Fowler wasn't part of the board at this point in time, these were the 6 community workshops that took place across the city. You can see what the numbers were, 657 persons over I think a 2 or 3 week period of time. And you can see what the numbers were at each one of these workshops and presentations. So at this point in time, I will close my mouth and give the board an opportunity for questions or discussion with the superintendent or among themselves.
I want to move on this because I think it's important. I think it's timeline a little bit, only because I think that, and I'm pretty aware of the importance of knowledge, but the building program. where they talked about some goals that we had, like increasing our population to 30,000 within the city by 2030, to meet the natural growth rate of jobs. And not once in this report was St. Louis Public Schools mentioned. And in the report, they did talk about the decrease in population and where that decrease mainly came from, which is North St. Louis, which of course these two closings will affect it. But what was most amazing about why people left North St. Louis was because things that we're all aware of, but as a city, we're not doing anything about it. For instance, jobs aren't there. Housing that has had growth value to them aren't there. Houses that little bungalows in South St. Louis, 3 bedrooms, are valued at significantly more than that exact same bungalow on a different plot of land in North St. Louis. So they're leaving and they're going to other places. And while there's growth in the Central West End and South St. Louis, there's not that growth in North St. Louis. So if we don't work with the city very closely and fix some of those problems with the people who are in fact leaving, we're going to always be closing schools in the same area. So I strongly urge the district to work closely with the city to ensure that they're in with our plan and they're going to add some resources, some dollars to make sure that we're not, creating an additional bias against those areas that suffer the most. I think that, we should have, when we present this school closing plan, we should have more of a solid plan than just a repurposing plan, but some more solid ideas of how we would repurpose those schools. I go to a trainer who runs his gym out in a school in Jenny, a repurposed school that was repurposed for community development, and now PJC is putting a health clinic in that same building. I think we have to have some ideas of what we're going to do. So in our communication, we don't have to have ideas for all schools, but we should have a broad idea of what some of these things are going to look like. And we need a commitment from our city government leaders that they are going to be behind us and help us, because I don't see how a school district grows if the city's not including us in their development plan, and they're not talking regularly with our school district about how everything that happens in our city impacts the school system. We're going to have a hard time getting people to, increasing our population by 30,000 if our schools aren't improved. And we're not going to, I don't know if we can improve schools simply by closing them and not have the city be a partner with us, and not just a passive partner, but a very active partner with us. And so I would ask that we sit down with the city leaders and include them in this school closing plan and get some commitments to them on repurposing buildings, get some commitments from them on developing jobs in North St. Louis, get some commitments from them on improving housing conditions in North St. Louis, because our district is 75% Black. A good portion of those people live in North St. Louis, and unless we do something there, I think we're just going to be having this problem continuously, and parents are going to be frustrated. People in the community who are going to be frustrated. And so I ask us just maybe slow it down just a little bit and get the city involved in this, because they owe us that commitment as a school system.
So, Board Member Fowler, we have been at the table with the city for the last 3 or 4 years on this topic. This is not the initial time that this has occurred. We've met with the city planning department multiple times. Board president also had a conversation with myself, with the mayor, 2 months ago relative to the same matter. So we have been at the table with the city, at least in this particular administration, over a period of time. The city has limited resources and limited commitment around additional resources, as you indicated, around changing the pattern of what has occurred. We've had this, I have personally had the conversation with parties of the city for the last 10 years as it relates to this issue. And the city has attempted to support the kind of emphasis that we're talking about, but they have minimal resources as well. And I'm not saying they don't have a plan, they do have a plan. And the latest meeting that we had with the city, most of the development was in South St. Louis or Central Quarter, very little was in North St. Louis. So that's just the reality of those meetings. And they've been very, very supportive of talking to us and meeting with us and looking at what we're doing. And we've sat down with them on a continuous basis. As a matter of fact, some schools in North St. Louis did not close the last time we had this conversation because they were looking at NGA coming in that area. And we were looking at schools in that area. We backed off on certain schools, closing those schools because of NGA possibly coming. And obviously, it's here now. And so part of the conversation that we're going to have with the city and with this board is where development is coming from, the information we have from the city. They do have a 2, 3, 4 year plan around what they're looking at, how many building permits have come out, and all of those kinds of things. So I will strongly support the notion of us meeting with the board, them again, and bringing back all of the data relative to what the city is saying, and that has and will impact any recommendation we make to you. That is indicator number 4. If you look at here, this notion of potential for neighborhood collaboration. That's where that fits, and that's what we are looking to get feedback from the city or anyone else related to this space.
I guess for me, I just am looking for something stronger, because to me, I find it amazing that we can have such a strong report that comes out of the St. Louis Development Corporation of all the things we're supposed to do, and the city schools are not included. So, and I understand conversations. I think we have to push for a documented commitment, because this study, took place with a lot of people involved, resources, and they could come up with a plan that does not mention the school system. For me, as a reader of the plan, I have to ask, how serious is our city about our school system? Because these are talked about many of the things that are in this plan, but without the city's commitment and participation in this on a real level, on a documented level, committed that shows commitment, I'm concerned that I don't want, this service from the city, and then we're struggling trying to make it better on our own, because this plan that they put together, to me, indicates that maybe they did either it's the oversight to consider the schools, and we need to go back and say, hey, we need to incorporate the school system, or there's not a real commitment to help the school system improve. And I don't know how a city improves, the school system doesn't improve. So I do recommend that we go back to the city and really incorporate what they're going to do in this proposal plan.
Yes, ma'am.
I would say, Dr. Fowler, I agree with you. And I don't think our city leadership does have a concerted approach to education in our city. I feel like we have a mayor that feels powerless when it comes to education, and she doesn't have any control or direction on the future of education in the city, and that's sad. We have a standing committee at the Board of Aldermen on Education and Youth Matters, and they had one meeting a while ago, a year ago, and that's unacceptable. And if they have an issue with that, have another meeting. But honestly, our city officials don't have, I haven't seen a concerted effort to stress the importance of education. You're absolutely right. If we're not talking about where schools are, and how many students we have in schools, how are we talking about increasing our school population? And to your point, Dr. Adams, I know you're not talking about, just Northside schools are closing, but the reality is that Northside schools have closed before, and Northside schools are probably up for the conversation when we look at things like enrollment demand. And again, going to your point, Dr. Fowler, if we're closing schools on the north side and they're planning on building buildings, schools and houses and housing development, who's going to move into a neighborhood that doesn't have a school? So that clearly is not a solid plan if that's the development court's plan right now. If they plan on bringing people into areas with no schools. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a failure on our city leadership's part, and I don't know what else we have to to do that. I don't know what the fruit of the conversation was, Dr. Atkinson, you, the board president, and city leadership, but that's just something that's not very visible. I wish it were more visible, and clearly it's not. And it's a clear slash in the face of the education system thing. FLTS is just not even in the plan.
Hi, this is Natalie. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You can go ahead.
I am just wondering, 2/3 of the city budget is for police, and we are seriously underfunded in education. I'm wondering if the city is under-resourced, if there might be any push toward getting them to reallocate some of that budget to services that people need in the community. We're always talking about adding social workers to schools full-time, adding school nurses, but perhaps if there were some community health centers or something to that degree, we wouldn't need so many police and the schools wouldn't be taxed with that responsibility. So if there is a conversation that goes back to the mayor, I would like to see that question asked.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to kind of follow up as well, and I agree with everything that has been said, up until now. But for me, we're holding our student population hostage based on, what the mayor is and is not doing, what the aldermen are doing and not doing. And so if we want to move forward and provide a quality education for the students that we serve, then we'll have to make some tough decisions. If there are no students in North St. Louis, they're not there because their parents or the caregivers have made a decision that North St. Louis is not accommodating to their families, be that job, housing, etc. And so it comes back to what we will do as a board to fully service the children in our charge right now. And for me, we have to look at getting as many resources as we possibly can get so that we can give them what they need to thrive and survive and be competitive. And that lends itself to close schools. It's a tough decision, but we have as much information as we can possibly get. There's only so much that we can control. We can't rely on the mayor and the aldermen, but we can certainly encourage our parents who vote on those specific offices to put people in place who support schools. And that's something anyone who lives in the city of St. Louis can do if they're educated around, and if they know that we have the best interest of their children at heart in doing it. We include them in the planning process and the selection process so that it's a win-win for everyone. We need to move forward. We don't have any more time to delay waiting on someone else to solve this problem.
I just like to speak to this, please.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Okay, so this is something that I have spoken to many times over the years, to our board and to you, Dr. Allen. I relate to our relationship with city officials as well as the constituents in our community. And that was one of the biggest reasons why there was a heavy push for an elected board to be back in place so that there was some type of accountability and transparency as it relates to leadership in the city and making decisions. And so with that being said, I think that I'm going to go back to the presentation that was made by Dr. Clancy. And one of the sentences that she said was that the quality of life of any community is dependent upon the performance of the public schools. And so one question that popped in my head when she said that was, why haven't the schools done well? And so when we talk about the schools in our community, I've always said that the board doesn't carry the entire burden. Yes, we are placed in a specific capacity to make decisions as it relates to policies and other, decisions around education. But in order for us to get as many resources as we can get, it causes us to have partnerships with the community. It means that we have to have partnerships with other elected officials and people in our community. And And so when we look at the different graphs and the information that has been submitted for the board tonight, we do know that many people leave North St. Louis because of the crime, because of the housing, because of the food there, because of the schools that are in the area. I'm from Wanda Park, so I see it all the time. And we do know that these things happen by design. They happen by design, and then things like this happen right now where we have to have a decision to close the school. And so I don't believe in the statement that says we don't have time to, consider these things out. When I talk to our city officials about the specific issues happening with SLPS, many of them just don't even know what's going on. And so some of the solutions, which I think we should be solution-based at this time, is that we need to be strategic about when they have their board meetings, there should be an SLPS rep in every single meeting to talk about what is happening. Yes, it is an extra step, but if that means that we're going to reach more people, then so be it. When churches have, they're reading their agenda, perhaps we have somebody there to talk about what's happening in this specific area with this school, but that's by this church. We all have a responsibility in our different capacities to inform the people that we are engaging with.
I'd like to say something about school closures, because it has affected me a great deal. Back in 2004, I believe I was working for the St. Louis Lead Prevention Coalition, and they were working very closely with the city of St. Louis. And I saw that organization, along with the city officials, to strategically help destroy North St. Louis. They were going into homes and giving violations to people that didn't really deserve it so that they could take their property. And to me, this has always been about removing Black and brown people from North St. Louis. And this has never been about building up the schools. This has always been about the land grab that was going to happen, and it's happening now. And we're all suffering as a result of it. I'm really disappointed because I've been looking at a school in my area, I'm so upset. The high school in my area. Susan, the high school. Northwest High School. Northwest High School. And when I went to Northwest High School, there was nothing going on in my neighborhood. And there still isn't anything going on in my neighborhood. And so we have neglected to put programs in that are beneficial toward our students. We have had wonderful educators in St. Louis Public Schools. We have people that are very dedicated and love our students. But we have had an administration that has put into place Team 4 over decades to destroy North St. Louis, so they can come in and get that land and get us out of there. And that's what's happening now. And that's why I want to know, just closing schools, I understand that we need to think about saving money and that kind of thing, but we need to have a plan, because I'm sick and tired of looking at Walnut Park School sitting down there dead and no youth at all. I ask if we could perhaps, if the school is no longer usable, to tear the school down if you have to, and keep the land until we can do better, or use it for solar energy or wind power so that we can make money to build new schools. Because if we can build a soccer stadium, if we can build a football stadium, surely we can put up the best schools for our students and our staff, because they don't have it. Right now, we're still laboring in old buildings that have poor ventilation systems, and our staff and our students deserve so much more than that, and they deserve to be paid more than that. And so what I'm saying is that the city, we have a mayoral race coming up next year, and I really hope that people will look at that, because I, as a city taxpayer, am sick and tired of paying taxes and not getting my money's worth. It really does upset me. I'm sick and tired of our children not getting what they deserve and seeing closed buildings. So I just have to say, we need a plan. We need a plan, because our children deserve brand new schools. Our staff deserves brand new schools that have programs in them that help them further their education. We need trade schools. We need all of that, and we have not gotten it. And the reason why people are leaving, because they have not been able to get the kind of programs that they need. We send all that money from the DSAVE program out there to build up county schools, and they have wonderful schools, and they've been able to maintain their neighborhoods. While in my neighborhood, it is in the morning, there's no one driving to work partly. There's nothing going on. So that's why. And I'm really sick of just letting elected officials get by with destroying us on purpose and coming in and buying up our schools for the same amount of money that you would pay for a house. And that's what I look at on the real estate committee. They're paying the same amount of money for a house that they would for a school. And then they're smiling all the way to the bank while many of our residents have suffered and lost their property in real estate court. So that's the way I feel about that.
I want to make one final comment. And I'm not against the proposed criteria. I actually think it's great. The new criteria that is actually the criteria we should use. What I'm suggesting is that if we don't work closely with the city and get a commitment to them to, make some of these schools community centers that they are helping to fund, to have LRA assist us in doing something more with these schools, or maybe demolishing them, but allow us to keep the land so that we don't have to go through the cost of demolishing them. Get some commitment from them first, so that we can communicate that to the community, so they can understand there's more than just getting rid of schools, but hey, there are some other thoughts. We know what else we're going to do with some of these buildings, and get that commitment from the city to help us. And then, I'm just saying, slow it down for a little while. I'm not saying slow it down a year or anything like that, but let's work on that commitment, and then use the criteria, the revised criteria, because I think it is really good. But what we don't want to do is close schools in areas where there's a real potential to do something different. Just like we waited on the NGA. If there's some commitments we can get from the city to say, hey, we're going to do something fantastic in Walnut Park where I go to church. If we can get some commitment, and I've worked with the auditors in that district, and they're having the same conversations that you guys are saying about their area. But what is the commitment from the city to help us come up with some plans for some of these, that land, some of these buildings, and if in fact we have to close them and maybe tear some down, LRA does the tearing down, not us. We don't pay for that. But get some commitment so that when we roll this out to our community, we also roll out some solid plans on things that are going to be to the benefit of the community as we do this. In addition to the improvement in education, but what about an improvement to the community that these schools were in? And I think this is something to me that is of an urgency. So this is not something to wait on. We do it quickly so that we continue with the school closing plan at a reasonable pace. So I'm not suggesting not doing it. I'm just suggesting doing it with more meat behind it. And that meat, I think, can come from the city's commitment to our community and our students and parents.
So I very much appreciate all of the passion that I'm hearing from the board, as this is probably, aside from the pandemic, the most important decision that any board could make, certainly to be making this time. It's really important and deserves our full thought. To me, looking at the comparison between the original criteria and the proposed criteria reflects some of these values that I'm hearing from the board. So, for example, I so very much appreciate the removal of academic performance from the criteria altogether, because as we all know, and I'm hearing from you all tonight, so much of that academic performance is a direct result of these systemic inequalities and racism that the city has put out for the city for so long. So removing that is, in my mind, an acknowledgement of the outcomes that we're seeing are a result of the inequality and racism that has been so pervasive in the city. I do also see this proposed criteria as a real opportunity for us to just reinvest in our student outcomes and also to demonstrate a renewed commitment to the community and to our families. So I very, very much agree with you, Dr. Roberts, that out of all of these things that we're talking about tonight, the only thing that we actually can control on this board is student outcomes and our allocation and commitment and resources to students, because the students who are here now, we have an obligation and a duty and an honor to serve in the best way that we can. School closures, unfortunately, is part of that conversation because of all of the things we're saying, for sure. But we can't allow the students that are here now to suffer in perpetuity because we're waiting on students that may or may not come from a city that may or may not care about us as a district. So while these extended conversations with the city are extremely important, and I would encourage them to happen, I don't think we can slow down this process based on entities that we can't control and entities who have not shown an interest in our district so far. Because that really would really demonstrate injustice to the students that we currently have. So I think, you know, beyond all of those things, this timeline is also aligned to the decision-making, I guess, timeline of the district. So as we all know, the bulk of contracts and decisions for the following school year really come in that February through March timeline. So if we don't know how many buildings we're going to have, I don't know how we could possibly enter into contracts and negotiate those things in good faith. So, you know, it's an interesting time to be talking about this, but there are some considerations as far as district governance goes that we really need to make sure that we're involving in this conversation. And it is hard. I agree. Again, Dr. Roberts, this is really difficult. It's hard to hear. It's hard to recognize that we are the decision-making entity for this, but looking at those things that are within our locus of control, I think is really important. And we need to really consider those criteria and how they're affecting the students that we currently have.
I'd like to add that one of the things we control is effort, the effort we put forth in making changes. And what I'm suggesting is that we put forth an effort to get the city involved and make some commitments quickly so that as we're closing these schools, we make the right choices. I mean, one thing I learned in business is that when things are important, you do it quickly, you do it firmly, and you try to get commitments before you make, you know, decisions that are going to have a long-term impact. So we can actually choose to put forth a all-out effort to get the students, the city, more committed to our community, without knowing every detail of what they're going to do. But if we could get commitment, they understand the passion, they understand our concerns, and we could get commitment that, yeah, LRA is going to assist us and it's going to have to demolish a building. Yeah, we are going to be behind you in creating community centers for some of these areas, more depressed areas, and get that done quickly. Then we have something to say as we close the school. This is not something I'm suggesting we put off, you know, in the next 6 months. We just shouldn't move that slow. We should move quickly, extremely quickly. And I think successful organizations tend to move very quickly when we have matters of importance like this, and decisions to make like we're being asked to make. And thank you for sharing that. I feel the energy that you have in that. Let me just kind of share some context. When I decided to run for the board, it was brand new. I didn't really know what I was doing. But after I won, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to talk to the mayor of the city to see where our mayor stood in terms of public education. And it took me 1 year to have that conversation. So it was the inaction that said to me about a commitment to public education. I also decided to go to the Board of Aldermen and just hear the conversations that were going on and impacting the lives of the voters and their families, the students that we serve, and recommended that every ward bring in a conversation around education. And we have, 27, 28 wards, so that was a recommendation that I made as well. Additionally, we have our elected officials, and they work very, very hard, but we also have all these giveaways. We have chips and abatements that just fly off the shelves, and there's no connection to public schools around that. Just think it's just a fraction of the money that they give away in chips and abatements was given to the school district around the building fund that would help us upgrade buildings, that would help us secure buildings, that would help us do a number of things that our kids are so deserving of. And so I respect, all of the conversation that we're having. I'm just sharing with you a lived experience.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, and I appreciate that. I did have a question. I don't know if this is directed to the superintendent of the board. I guess it's just all of us that are here. So in the video, and I appreciate you playing that, Dr. Adams, the Fort Ferguson video, you could see at the northern river, there were two signs on the side that said, conserve water, right? And of course, we saw the videos, we understand the implications of that. So I guess my question to all of us is, how do we ensure that this decision, whatever it may be, and current and future decisions that we make are decisions that are having us look upstream as opposed to dealing with where we are? Because when I hear what Donna and Susan are saying, is we are connecting, and we can't continue to operate in this downstream mentality because we'll just stay downstream. So I hear what you're saying, Dorothy, about like, well, we have to do what we have to do for students right now and where we are now. But of course, where we are now is a factor of us being on the northern side of the river and being downstream. So I guess my question is just, how do we continue to push that urgency around looking upstream? If that's the video that we watched, and that's my biggest takeaway, is how do we look upstream? Because, and we see the implications play out on a monthly basis. Ms. Banks gave us the presentation 2 weeks ago, telling us that there was PPE funding, that a grant that we were approved for, but can no longer get the funds because the city already spent all the money that it was gifted. So these do have strong implications, and of course it's a pandemic, so this is a particular case, but we can't ignore how intertwined this is. And again, going back to this plan, if we're talking about development, and our role as governors here is to make sure that we ensure the success and growth of this district, the development of this district, we can't ignore the fact that we sit in a city. We are not isolated from it. We are not in a bubble. We are part of the city, and we are in the city, and whatever the city does, we bear the effects of it because, again, we are downstream of whatever happens in the city. So my urge is to continue to think and make sure that decisions that we make and how we think are where we are thinking, looking upstream as opposed to just making decisions based on where we are downstream.
So, Mr. Lane, your comments are 100% inappropriate because in anticipation of what I thought the board would say, I kind of thought about the same thing and have a response, and I think it's an appropriate response, and not a negative response, but to give context to what you're saying. The question becomes, why aren't we fighting that fight instead of closing schools? City, state, and federal officials are ignoring our community needs. The school district needs to keep schools open and fight for more resources. That's a real criticism, and I think it's real. We recognize the presence of systemic racism as part of the cause of an equitable distribution of resources that plague our communities. Therefore, we are committed to advocating for our families and our communities in the following ways. And I think the board is going to take up one of those things tonight. Progressive legislative agenda, community partnerships, as Ms. Jones has already indicated, alliance with other school districts with similar resource issues, including rural districts as well, because this is not just a city issue, it's an issue across the entire country and in Missouri as well. Districts are closing everywhere, not just in St. Louis City or schools. Partnering with local and regional developers, similar to what board member Fowler said, partnering with grassroots organizations with a demonstrated commitment to our families and community. However, as we engage in that long-term strategy, we also have to optimize the use of our current resources today. Similar to what the president said, we are committed to today. Yes, we can think about the future, and I think we do both at the same time, but we can't stop dealing with the reality of what we have right now. An elementary school with 97 kids makes it almost incredibly impossible to support those kids in that building. It's impossible. It's literally impossible to do so in an equitable way. So yes, I agree with Mr. Lane 100%.
I think the board can do a A and a B. A, look at the present issue before us, but B, commit itself along with administration to fight for the additional resources that the river talked about. We have to continue, we have to get a stream similar to what's in the North, the North River. The really is to address this 100%. This is a short-term solution. This is not a long-term solution, because unless there are equal dollars coming to the district in a way that we saw on the north side, then we will continue to have this problem, Mr. Lang and board, not next year and 5 years from now. We'll fix it short-term, but long-term, the next superintendent will be standing here, new board members sitting here, talking about the same thing 5 or 10 years from now, unless we advocate in a different kind of way to get increased resources long-term for this particular district. This is a stopgap measure, and I just want to be clear about it. Short-term to address the current and present issue before us, but long-term, as Mrs. Jones indicated, there's a long-term effort to do something uniquely different in North St. Louis and South St. Louis. There's no ifs and buts about it, but only the board, political people who are sitting at this table can advocate in a different kind of way to get resources from the city, from the state, from the federal government to try to equalize the resources that are coming in, the dollars that are coming in, to try to equalize this river issue. And I think that this particular entity, Ferguson Forest, did an excellent job of articulating that. We have, and I'll shut up after this. We have 12 high schools. Only 2 or 3 offer calculus. Only 2 or 3. Why? Because the populations are so small and it's difficult finding calculus teachers. Less schools means greater opportunities for kids to get the resources that you want them to have, that in some cases are already there, but are being leveraged differently because the populations are so small. So I'll shut up with that, board members.
Dr. Adams, I appreciate what you said. I appreciate this. I would add that, you know, when we go on these criteria that if during that time you could also present us with a document of the B plan so that we can have both of them in hand and communicate both of them. I think that would be better, because I agree with you. We have to advocate for something better for the future of our city and our city students. Even though they have to do some of these, we still have to have that plan and communicate that. In addition to we have a plan to, you know, advocate for more of our city, our state, our business leaders, et cetera, to improve our schools. So I appreciate that you had a response.
Thank you.
Dr. Adams, I'd like to know if you can provide a list of the potential schools that you're speaking of, because I know when you started your presentation that it might not be a good idea, but to me, I don't know about the other board members, but I'd like to go by those schools. I'd like to look. I'd like to examine the history. I'd like to really take a look at each piece of each school that you're speaking of, because that's important.
So I have not identified any schools, as I said before earlier, until the board says this is the criteria to use, because we haven't, and I'll be totally candid and honest, we have not put a name of a school in a piece of paper intentionally, because I wanted the board to say, yes, this is the criteria, we'll take this criteria, we'll go back, we'll score schools based on this criteria, and then we'll come back at the next board meeting and provide that to you. That was the intent of coming back on the 10th to do that. If the board feels comfortable with this criteria, and then no, and I think quietly I hear that, then we will move forward over the next 2 weeks to do that. And to your point, board member Fowler, we will engage the city aggressively over the next 2 weeks while we do that. Well, again, we've been at the table with them, but we have not been at the table with them, quite frankly, since the pandemic occurred. We did a lot of work on the front end, but since March and the pandemic, everyone has been really just trying to address the issues that are clear and present dangers in front of them. But we will re-engage back with the community development agency, the city and LRA, and Mr. Casey's on that committee. So we can get to Otis Williams in a second to discuss with him all of the details, and we've done that before.
That's a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
How should we especially do that? What does that look like?
That's a really good question. I think, you know, first of all, they have to be committed to wanting to see what's best for kids. And I think we have to gauge that based on not only what they say, but what they do. We have been incredibly engaged with a number of different aldermen and obviously the president of the board and other persons as well. But I think some of you said it really, really well. And I want to try to be as honest as I can. I think with there being 27 aldermen, some don't have schools in their district. And so there's not even a level of commitment around what happens to schools because they don't have any schools that they support. And so they have minimal involvement around what happens in that particular ward because they're not concerned about necessarily the ward that's next to them. I think they have an overall general concern like I would or you would, but not in a real intimate way. I think to answer your question, long and short, I think we have to confront them. We have to have some conversation with them to ask them what their level of commitment around certain things. There was a ward meeting, I want to say this week or late last week, for one of the alderpersons who had all of the principals on the phone for their particular ward. And the alderperson was basically indicating, I cannot have any schools closed in my ward. And they have 4 or 5 schools in their ward, but the numbers of kids in those buildings are less than 150. And so they realize how important schools are, but they have minimal resources to try to impact them. And that's just the reality. Every time I talk to a ward person, they don't have a lot of resources, Ms. Jones, to really leverage this issue. They get, I don't know how much they actually get, but they don't get a ton of money to try to make an impact. And they're dealing with streets, they're dealing with houses that are dilapidated, and then you add schools to that, and then it's a big, big challenge. And Dr. Roberts kind of spoke to it, but there's a real challenge in the wards in terms of the power that the older people have in terms of influencing something.
So thank you for your response, Dr. Adams. I'm not sure if you remember, that a while back, I did an analysis of the schools when there was proposed list of schools, or I did an analysis of the city of St. Louis and our areas that had, high crime rates, very low employment, of course, that are food deserts that had businesses, churches. I did everything in a document, and basically, after I did that, I sent that to you guys. So what it showed me was that those areas that had those high crime rates that were food deserts, trying to get my thoughts together, that were facing these specific issues that make people move out of the area were the areas that we have the lowest amount of students inside of those schools. And so strategically moving forward, I think it would make sense for us to have conversations with people that are in the 3rd ward, people that are in the 21st ward, people that are in the 27th ward, people that, those older people, the state reps, the committee people that are in those specific areas. We target those people first because we know that those are problem areas in the city of St. Louis, and then the other areas come after that because we know where there's a real need at for SOPS. And perhaps even if the older people or the committee people or whomever in that area are not getting the resources that they need, do we have extra resources or partnerships that will be willing to, support those areas in an extra way because they need that push, they need those resources to keep these schools afloat or to get more people or kids inside of the schools?
I think it's, obviously the board has put a number of things on the table. We will go back tomorrow in the next couple of days to try to leverage all of the things that the board said and provide the board with an updated ASAP.
So I have a couple more thoughts that I want to make sure that we consider as we move into this next phase. So, as I've already said, I agree with all of you and appreciate so much your passion about these specific issues. But we're spending a lot of time talking about outside political forces and very little time talking about students and teachers and staff. So you all know, I think, that I taught at Northwest for 6 years and I taught science. And by the end of my time at Northwest, I'm teaching 5 different science tracks because it was important to me that we are able to offer those things to our students. But we were a very small school that had difficulty allocating resources, in much of the same way that we're talking about tonight. So if there is a direct impact on students and on staff, we talk a lot about burnout, we talk a lot about teacher job satisfaction, teaching 5 science tracks, 2 of which were AP in a school with little resources and a science class that I literally tuned out myself. I was able my burnout, and I'm sure that there are other teachers in the district that are feeling the same way. So yes, all of these political things are very, very true and very real and long-term, absolutely need to be addressed. But we are sacrificing people that are currently being served by this district because we're not looking at the reality that we have now. So both of these things are true, both of these things are important, but our responsibility here is to make sure that our students and our staff are well and healthy and receiving a good education. And we cannot do that in buildings that have 97 kids or 100 kids. The teach that you like to educate that kind of calculus, I think that's true in a lot of this advanced coursework that we very much want to offer. So after I left the district, I taught for a test prep organization, and I had the opportunity to teach courses out of a number of schools, county schools, private schools. That difference of what they are being provided and we are providing is extremely different. We have the opportunity to make up some of that difference by considering these hard things. Beyond that, I had the opportunity to work in Hazelwood district for a while with doing some tutoring. A district that has similar demographics to us is offering things like television studio for students to work out of, have any number of electives that we are not able to offer. Because we have spread these resources so thin across the district, we are not providing the education that our students deserve. So these political pieces are important, but largely outside our control, at least as we sit today. And during my time on the board, I would come to SAB meetings, and I know that this school closure piece was up before the SAB a number of times. This constant revisiting of school closure is traumatic to the community at large. And so we want to make sure we're making thoughtful, informed decisions and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and providing outcomes for students. But we also have to recognize that stretching this out, we've been talking about this board has been talking about it for 12 months now. There is a level of trauma that we are imposing by dragging this out. And so I think we have to really be thoughtful and carefully balance all the aspects of this so we're able to do the job that we're here to do, which is providing that education for kids.
And Dorothy, just to add on to what you said, I would just caution you on, when you speak about people saying things, passionately and, and we need to be talking about the facts, these are facts. And until you live this life, until you walk up and down the streets of North St. Louis and have to pass yourself up every single day, then you really can't speak directly to what these people are really going through. And so when we talk about, us hurrying up this process and we're leaving these kids behind, then there needs to be some type of analysis of what resources that they need right now in those specific schools. Because a lot of them are saying that they're not getting what they need right now, this week, today, and as of last year. So what is it on a transparent level that we can see from each school that they were needing that they did not get, that's going to hinder them from, doing better in their education, more importantly?
And if we're talking about generational impact, these decisions are going to affect generations. 12 months, less than 12 months of conversation compared to 18 years of education, I feel like those don't even compare personally. Now, if you want to get more strategic with our conversation, that's fine. But I think if we're just comparing length of time, we can compare 12 months to a generation of outcomes. Compare 12 months to a transformation plan or development plan for the city that doesn't include the future of St. Louis education. We can compare a lot of things if we're just looking at time.
And I agree. So I think if this is something that the board feels is not the right time, I think we owe it to this district to say that now.
I think it's not. I think it is time to consider it. I'm just saying we need to consider this along with other considerations. Don't exclude one so that we can do the other. I'm saying do both and do it as a matter of urgency. There is no waiting to COVID in for us to go back to the mayor of the city and say we need a prevent. I mean, everything's blamed on COVID, I understand, but this is too urgent for us to say we need to wait for that conversation. It's some kind of commitment that they're going to work with us moving forward. So, people just don't wait for stuff. Maybe, we don't have to wait on these things. And I'm saying do both and do both with a sense of urgency so that we don't ignore one part of the conversation just so that we could get to this part. As an organization, we have and as the board, we have a responsibility to consider all factors, including those generational factors that have existed forever. And I have one comment and one question. I would encourage and I sat in on the Ferguson presentation, the short version that we saw night and the long one. I would encourage everybody, parents, teachers, who's ever listening, all the board members to go read their report, because that report is so enlightening. It tells a story that says that these systemic issues that have been occurring had impacted North St. Louis and other depressed areas so great. And a lot of times, decisions were made without understanding the systematic pressures that were on this area. So I really encourage everybody to go and read the report. It is amazing. And when I was in on the meeting, I asked them if they had read the St. Louis Development Corp's report. And when I talked about some of the things that were in it, they were astounded that that report was out there and they didn't know about it. So I encourage everybody to read it. But the question I have is, number 5, what does that mean? I don't even know what other special program considerations mean.
So we have 2 schools that are part of the CPN. Those are 2 special programs at Ashland and Merrimack. That might be a special program. Special program at CSMB, which is a medical out of high school. So that would be the kind of special programs we're talking about. Some schools might be SIG, get additional funds for school improvement. So those would be, we would have to define what the special programs are.
I guess maybe for consideration, we could add maybe a 6th criteria. Like, that means if the school is situated in such a way that it can be used for other students, and so if we are considering all 5 of these, or at least 4 of those things, that school would be a great, we have constituents, to see something else in that community that is extremely beneficial to that community. We have that on the table, so we know.
And that would be our number 4. That would be part of number 4 as well.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add a student point. I was responsible for running a school in North St. Louis, a school that was under resourced. The money that comes to the school follows the child, so your budget is built on how many students you have in that building. And so if the budget that you receive is not enough to provide children with what they need, then as a building leader, you go out and you seek and find those resources. Okay? We were a high performing school, but we didn't have access to technology. And the district wasn't providing that. And so it was incumbent upon we as building leaders to seek out those additional resources. So we really have to frame it around the fact that budgets are allocated on the number of students in the building. And so if you have, what did you say, 100 kids in the building?
Yes, ma'am.
Then your budget is predicated on those 100 students. And so if you're looking to do something extraordinary, it may not fall within the confines of your budget. And so I'm not saying to haphazardly close schools. I'm saying to be strategic in that so that we can indeed provide the quality education and the equity and all the stuff that we talk about and try to minimize the kinds of injustices that our boys and girls are suffering and will continue to suffer in a world that's not really designed for their success. So we have an opportunity to make a difference. The decision may be a very hard one, but it's one that is made in the best interest of the kids we serve.
Hi, this is Natalie again. I had one last comment.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
So I wanted to bring it back to number 2 under the proposed criteria, which is the building conditions. And like many other board members have mentioned, I too live in North St. Louis, and the conditions here are a lot different than particularly some of our magnet schools. I would really like to see I guess a cost benefit analysis or a timeline even for what it would cost to have new buildings in place of those old buildings when compared to the maintenance of the buildings that are in the worst condition. Maybe that means most expensive to maintain. Maybe that means the building that's been the longest since it's gotten any upgrades. But I know that St. Louis is very attached to our historic buildings, but we can't continue to put that attachment ahead of our kids' needs. So when we have schools that are in need of better ventilation, better wiring, better technology access, I think that it would be unfair for us to not consider what new buildings would cost when factoring this in. And I believe, Dr. Adams, that you mentioned this several months ago when we had this conversation initially, that some of these buildings are just cost prohibitive to maintain. So I would really appreciate that. I think that is a good thing to have moved up to number 2 when we talk about equity and when we talk about a racial equity lens, North Side versus South Side, et cetera. I'm not sure if that's something that could be done or exactly what that data would look like, what data points would be collected, but that's just something that I'm thinking about that may be able to address some of the inequities, at least guide our decisions in that.
We can provide something close enough to that for the board. We can do that.
Thank you.
In the original, you give us an idea of the weight that
My insurance has been paid by Friday. We discussed them today at length in my meeting on yesterday. Was it today or today? I think it was today. We did, and we came up with some categories and weights as well. But I wanted to hear from the board first before we went any further. So no later than Friday, as early as tomorrow. I want to thank the board for engaging tonight. I really appreciate your thoughtful dialogue between each other, among each other, and between myself as well and administration, because I know they're listening as well. But I just want to thank the board for your comments, your concerns, and we will aggressively, as Ms. Fowler said, look to try to engage in ways that we can to bring back some information to the board on a December 10th date. Not hearing any vote or anything else, I'm going to move forward with November 10th. And obviously, if the board wants to push anything back, they always have the flexibility to do that. So I want to thank the board. I have one more update, and it's not a presentation. Just want to quickly talk about restart. I want to indicate that we started with pre-K through grade 6 over the last 2 weeks. And just to give you some idea, we have 11,222 students enrolled in elementary schools. 6,500 indicated that they were coming to in person. Of that number, about 4,700 have actually shown up. So that represents about 72% of the kids who said they were coming to in person are there. And all of our elementary schools, that represents about 42% of the actual population of elementary schools. We're looking to do the same thing with middle schools on 11/9. That's on 11/9 for middle schools, and then high schools in a very limited way on 11/30. I know there's been a great deal of concern about the transmission rate and those kinds of things. I provided to you a City of St. Louis chart that lists what the number of kids in the City of St. Louis who come down with the virus. That number is a max of 360 kids in the entire city that have had the virus. That number is higher for high schools, 181. And that means that we have probably about 50,000 elementary kids, or 50,000 school-age kids in the City of St. Louis, so getting education, public, private, and those who go to the county. But the numbers are about 300 cases of kids that have come down with the virus altogether. And so I just kind of want to frame that represents about 0.04 kids in the City of St. Louis who've had the virus so far. And obviously, a lot of the charter schools and public schools are not in place, although the Catholic schools have been in place since the beginning of the pandemic. So I just want to give the board some context around that. We're surveying middle and high school families now, and about 50% have responded to the survey, and we'll determine how we move forward with that. And it looks like 11.9 for middle school and 11.30 for high schools, and I'll provide the board with an update in writing relative to that. So just wanted to kind of cover the restart piece. In the state of Missouri, because I know people keep hearing about the rate in the state of Missouri, it's about 18%. In the city of St. Louis, it's about 5%. And so the number I looked at today from the state was about 10%. That number fluctuates, but in the city of St. Louis, it's about a 5% rate of positivity, if you will, in the city of St. Louis, which is much, much lower than the state. I know it's continuing to be reported around a high rate, and that rate is correct for the state of Missouri, but much, much lower for the city of St. Louis. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Jones. That's what I was.
Just a couple things. Is it possible to put that document that you shared with us on the website?
Yes, ma'am.
If you go to our website and look at the COVID data dashboard, that information is not there that you just shared.
Yes, ma'am.
Nor is it on the city health department's website. And
Yes,
I think it would kind of take away the fear and the anxiety that our staff and parents are having, because we are in an unknown, unforgiving kind of environment. So as much information as they can have.
Yes, ma'am. I'll answer that subject tomorrow.
And then, I think there was an email about the voting day. Are we going to talk
Yes,
about that today?
yes, I'm going to address that right now. Another question about the resource. So I am asking the board, I'll get my document here. So at this point in time, there are 39 school sites that are designated polling sites for the upcoming Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020 presidential election, and obviously state and local elections as well. Per the current school calendar, St. Louis public staff are also scheduled to report to school buildings for staff professional development on November the 3rd, 2020. In light of high anticipated voter turnout and additional building maintenance requirements flowing from the current pandemic conditions, I recommend that the board amend the 2020-21 academic calendar to eliminate the November PD date. Also, for the reasons related to COVID-19 and to give our staff some additional recovery time, I'm recommending the board amend the 2020-21 school calendar and extend the Thanksgiving holiday closure by 2 days for 10-month employees to the 23rd and 24th, which will mean that there's no school on those 2 dates, and that for central office staff, which will be 12-month employees, that they would also be extended to that 25th, which is a Wednesday, thereby closing the district and closing the district down for the entire week. It will also be my recommendation that employees' holiday pay be extended, which I just said, to eligible employees for those 2 additional days, and these days will come with persons being paid their regular salary. Are there any questions from the board members for us today?
Yes, Dr. Adams, are you saying that November the 3rd, there will not be professional development?
That is correct. I'm recommending, right now, students don't come to school on next Tuesday. At this point in time, we were planning professional development, meaning all staff in the district will be having school-based professional development. I'm recommending that school, because the professional development was going to take place in buildings, and we have voting taking place in those buildings as well. So I'm recommending that nobody is in our building but the voting population that is there, and schools are closed down 100%.
Okay, and so my last question is November the 4th, the day after. Is there going to be some type of professional cleaning that happens, or will that be a day off?
That is why I'm requesting that staff, the custodians not be off, because they'll be there late that night cleaning that area. Plus the area is going to be isolated in terms of where persons are coming in and where they're going out. I don't want to impact them further by having people in a building for professional development. They have a local area where the voting population will be coming in and out, and limit what they need to clean, with the belief that I can use all of the custodians, because 39 buildings are going to be occupied for voting, but I'll have other custodians who support them in those buildings while their buildings are shut down, such that we can do the deep cleaning and get ready for school the next day.
And I just want to clarify, you're saying, whole week.
That is entire week, yes, ma'am. That is correct. We have enough days built in the calendar to accommodate, not having kids in school on that day, on those 2 days. I think Dr. Roberts is going to make one, I think.
I move that we, I make a motion to accept the amended calendar.
Yes. Mr. Lane? Yes. Dr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Yes.
So you requested this be, brought forth for a vote, if you'd like to speak about proposition R, and then, I'll entertain a motion to, vote on that statement. Natalie, can you hear us?
Barely. Could you repeat that?
Bring for this statement forward for a vote. I'm going to give you the chance to introduce that, and I'll entertain a motion to, vote on the statement.
Okay, so I think you said we are going to vote on the statement regarding Proposition R.
That we vote on this, I want to give you a chance to introduce the statement or read it into the, read it.
I'm sorry, I can't understand you. It's been a struggle this whole meeting to hear, honestly, when board members are talking, so I'm kind of getting bits and pieces.
So what I would do then, hopefully we can resolve that sound issue, is I will read the statement that Natalie, brought forward at the, meeting 2 weeks ago. So this statement, is in regards to Proposition R. So the statement reads, the St. Louis Board of Education is opposed to Proposition R in its current form. While the St. Louis Board of Education strongly supports increased funding for early childhood education, Proposition R is a proposal that would divert taxpayer dollars from public schools to non-public entities. In addition, the language of Proposition R is too vague and does not ensure that the $2.3 million raised from taxpayers would directly benefit children in their early years of education. The board strongly believes the best way to fund early childhood education is to increase funding through state foundation formula with support for all public schools. Now, if you want to add anything?
Yeah, and thank you, Ms. Van Noy, for putting that in the chat. I appreciate that. So Proposition R claims to be only a 6 cents per $100 evaluation, but the rate is already 19 cents, and that is a 1/3 increase, which applies across the board, not just to wealthy homeowners in more affluent neighborhoods. My big concern is SLPS is not like Ladue or Afton, where the penalty for not being able to afford your property taxes is just that you owe the government more money and then you get to keep living in your home. In St. Louis City, if you get 3 years behind on your property taxes, you lose your property. It goes either to a private bidder at the sheriff's tax auction, or it goes to the Land Reutilization Authority. And once a property goes to the LRA, it is no longer considered taxable within the district's assessment. It leaves the tax rolls essentially for good, and we have one more homeless person, one more homeless family, or one more homeless student to serve, and now with fewer resources. So given the leftover effects of redlining that have already decimated the north side with unfairly assessed property values, Proposition R is actually perpetuating inequality by extracting more resources from those areas, from the people who already face the highest stakes, and quashing their opportunity to build any generational wealth. It claims to invest in divested areas, but these areas will continue to be divested if we keep taking funds from them, especially for private entities to provide so-called education services with no performance standard or public oversight of their budget. St. Louis Public Schools also provides early childhood education, and we do have performance standards. So we cannot have an equitable education system that we talk about, racial equity lens and all of these things that we promise to our students if we don't stand up and say something against this. We can't have that equitable education until we have equitable taxation. And a 32% tax increase on our lowest income citizens is the antithesis of equitable. So that's my views. I am happy to answer questions or hear from other board members, but it's really important to me that when we're talking about a progressive legislative agenda, that we have to have a voice on this.
I feel like we'll give that a shot. So I have two questions, well, one question. So the question is that 2 weeks ago, when she brought this to our attention, I guess the language was the same. I was under the impression that she was going to be trying to figure out or try to understand the vagueness of those non-public entities, and as well as how much would actually go to case qualification. So I was wondering if she had an update on that. The second thing is, while I agree with everything she said about the equity distribution, if this is what we're adopting as language, none of that about equity is in this language. So trying to understand if that's also our thing, why we're not included in our good language.
Okay, I'm just catching up in chat. 1 second. So, right, so 2 weeks ago, we were going for a short statement rather than a long resolution that would outline everything. Those are my personal feelings. I think it is best to keep it narrow, but I obviously, we did ask for feedback on that statement. And if you would like to see equity included, I think it would be a good time to discuss that if you have a quick statement ready. But the election is coming up, and I feel like it's really important that we come out opposed to this. In my opinion, if that's the will of the board, I think it's important that we take a stance on this before the election so that it is impactful.
The equity statement included, I'm just saying that in her explanation, she included equity in there, yet it is not in this statement. So I'm just trying to understand the difference there. Because if that's what she led with as a reason, but it's not in the statement at all, so it's not important for her. I feel like it should be that's important. I'm just wondering why it's not included in the statement as clear.
What I would ask for at this time is that a motion to approve the statement that is before us, so that is the matter that we be voting on.
I move that we adopt the statement proposed in regard to Proposition R.
I think Natalie answered that. She said that those were personal feelings as to why it's important, that this statement was written this way to be addressing the aspects of Proposition R. So the item is going to include the statement that's before us. So if there is a different statement that we should be considering, that's an entirely separate conversation. So there has been a motion and a second. Are there further discussions on the statement before?
I wanted to say, though, that I did really agree with Adam that could have been in there, and I really could have gone on a long resolution. But because we asked Mr. Carroll, our lobbyist, to write this statement in alignment with our legislative agenda, he picked out a couple of bullet points, which was in the documents that he sent out. And he wrote that as a professional lobbyist with a little bit of input from me. I am more of a passionate activist, so if that's what he feels is effective and that's what we pay him to do, I feel like that is, it's probably a good strategy.
Ms. Thomas? Yes. Mr. Lane?
No.
Sexton. Mrs. Jones? Yes. Ms. Powell?
Yes.
The last item on our agenda tonight is, individual opportunity for your input. It essentially collects some of this information via email, and only heard back from one board member that wanted to provide us with an opportunity to get some feedback on our current meeting format and the way that we've been doing public comment or public participation. So if there's any board member who has some feedback, I'd love to hear it. Some follow-up. So let's get my email today. Once we start to go to I should do it that way. So I did get your email. I didn't realize that it was in response to the meeting. So it's essentially like, this was intended to be about in-person versus virtual meetings. Is this location? Is this meetings that we want to have? How we find with the public comment? The way that it has been being submitted in writing ahead of time.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion, I was concerned that, maybe those who take the time to write comments may not think of your, attention to those comments, so my feedback is that maybe make some statement on a regular basis, allow us to find out some that, send those to you, and then some, formal statement, so that those who are taking time to, send us emails or write comments, know that we are active. So I didn't make, in my email to you guys, I did not put that, like, sure, that makes sense. So, prior to this pandemic and switching to written public comment, we did provide a response to, the board secretary review over that people that spoke at our public meetings. So I'll talk about that tomorrow about what way we might do that in the written way. So I was looking to come on the May. However, I hadn't seen any information as relates to how many people would be able to be let in the meeting. But then, this is good. So there's amount and yeah, so I haven't seen anything like that. So at this time, I don't support it. And again, if there's some way we can acknowledge the public comments online, that would be fine. But as this is the policy capacity, I don't agree with it. I think it's the way that it is right now, and try to find a way to highlight the comments. I guess that our constituents have or information they'd like to give us. Hearing no further comment on this committee.
Dr. I don't know what our, anyway looks like, XY, but I have heard from the public that it might be ideal that I think sending their comments, they might want to do their audio. And I know we've had it for a minute, 3-minute time limit. Maybe we can do that, have an upload splits. And I wouldn't say, I don't know how long pandemic goes, infrastructure for it, but if you're knows of or has a way for people who don't want to type and can't type, be able to audio record sort of their public thing, you can get that to us. Yes,
we're gonna look to see if we could get that done. I think as I know, I said it would have to likely 24, 40 hours before the meeting, and then place that and limit it to a certain number, because there might be hundreds. But I can work with staff and then get back to the president in terms of what you might be recommending.
and I did have something, I know that text file is definitely smaller than audio and video, but just keep that in your ear.
Okay, we will look into it.
I move that we adjourn and convene into closed session pursuant to Missouri State Statute 610.021, section 4, real estate. Second, Ms. Stock.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Are we going to do committee reports or are we coming back into open session?
We don't have committee reports on the agenda tonight because it's a work session.
Okay, got it. Sorry, thanks. Yes.
So,